I'm Victoria Hartwell. I'm 28, and my family kicked me out for refusing to fund my sister's $75,000 wedding, then panicked when they discovered I owned their mortgage. It started with a family dinner where my parents announced I'd be contributing to Delilah's dream wedding, and when I said no, they cut me off completely. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly buying up their debt for months, and their shock when the foreclosure notice arrived with my name on it was just the beginning of how this story turned their world upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Before I tell you how a wedding fund demand became the biggest power shift my family has ever seen, tell me, where are you watching from? If stories about family manipulation and unexpected reversals resonate with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter most. Let's begin. The first time someone asked me to pay for something I didn't want, I was 7 years old, and my mother insisted I buy Delilah a birthday present with my own allowance money. "Family takes care of family," she said, standing over me as I reluctantly handed over the crumpled $5 bill I'd been saving for a new book. That phrase would haunt me for the next 21 years. Growing up in Millbrook Heights, a picturesque suburb outside Hartford, where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every family seemed to have their finances in perfect order, I learned early that appearances mattered more than truth. Our house on Rosewood Lane was the kind of place that looked magazine, perfect from the outside, white picket fence, flower boxes under every window, and a driveway that never had a single oil stain. But inside, beneath the carefully curated family photos and expensive furniture, was a different reality entirely. My parents, Robert and Evelyn Hartwell, had mastered the art of living beyond their means while making everyone else fund their lifestyle. Dad worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, pulling in what most people would consider a decent salary. But Mom's taste for luxury and their complete inability to say no to Delilah meant that money flowed out of our household faster than it ever came in. I discovered later that they'd refinanced the house 3 times, maxed out credit cards, and borrowed against Dad's 401k more times than I could count. But the real problem wasn't their spending. It was their expectation that I would always be there to cover the gaps. Delilah, my younger sister by 3 years, had been treated like visiting royalty since the day she was born. Where I was expected to work part-time jobs throughout high school and pay my own way through college, Delilah received a full ride courtesy of Mom and Dad's credit cards. Where I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic that I'd bought myself, Delilah got a brand new BMW for her 18th birthday. Where I was told to be responsible and practical, Delilah was encouraged to follow her dreams and never settle for less than she deserved. The pattern was set early and never wavered. When Delilah wanted to study abroad in France for a semester, guess who got the guilt trip about family loyalty when Mom and Dad couldn't afford it? When she decided to move to Manhattan after college to find herself as an aspiring fashion blogger, guess who was expected to help with her sky-high rent? Every crisis, every whim, every expensive decision Delilah made somehow became my financial responsibility through a combination of emotional manipulation and family obligation. I learned to navigate this minefield by becoming the kind of person who planned for everything. While Delilah was posting Instagram photos from expensive brunches, I was researching investment strategies and building an emergency fund. While she was shopping for designer clothes, I was learning about real estate and market analysis. While she was living for the moment, I was quietly building something that would give me power and independence. By the time I was 25, I'd saved enough money to start investing in distressed properties around our area. Nothing fancy, just small foreclosures and short sales that I could fix up and either rent out or flip for a profit. The real estate market in Connecticut had been volatile, which meant opportunities for someone with cash and patience. I kept my investments quiet, partly because I didn't want my family to know how much money I was actually making, and partly because I'd learned that any success I achieved would somehow become another reason why I should be funding their lifestyle. What I didn't tell anyone was that I'd also started buying up debt, not just any debt, specific debt from people who owed money to local banks and credit unions. It started as a curiosity about how debt collection worked, but it quickly became a strategic advantage. When you understand how debt flows through the financial system, when you know which mortgages are underwater and which property owners are struggling, you can position yourself in ways that most people never imagine. 6 months ago, I made a purchase that would change everything. Through a debt acquisition company based in Boston, I bought a portfolio of distressed mortgages from a small regional bank that was trying to clean up its books. The portfolio included 17 properties in the Millbrook Heights area, including one very familiar address, 847 Rosewood Lane, my family's house. I didn't set out to buy my parents' mortgage specifically. It was part of a larger investment strategy, and I honestly didn't realize their loan was in the portfolio until I was reviewing the paperwork weeks later. When I saw their names and address, my first instinct was to sell that particular mortgage back or transfer it to another company. I didn't want the complication of mixing family and business, but then Delilah got engaged. Jonathan Blackstone was everything my parents had always dreamed of for their precious daughter. Harvard MBA, family money, a job at a prestigious investment firm in Manhattan, and most importantly, completely willing to indulge Delilah's every expensive whim. Their engagement party at the Millbrook Country Club cost more than most people's annual salary, and it was just the beginning. When the wedding planning started, the numbers were astronomical even by Delilah's standards. $75,000 for a single day. A designer dress that cost more than my car. A venue so exclusive that it required a 6-month deposit just to hold the date. Flowers flown in from Ecuador. A photographer whose wedding portfolio read like a celebrity magazine. And somehow, according to my parents, it was my responsibility to help make it happen. The conversation that would change everything happened on a rainy Thursday evening in October. Around our old dining room table, where I'd eaten countless family dinners and endured years of lectures about responsibility and family loyalty, Mom had made her famous lasagna, the same recipe she always used when she wanted something, and Dad was pouring wine like we were celebrating something special. "Victoria," Mom said, her voice taking on that particular tone that meant she'd already decided how this conversation would end. "We need to talk about Delilah's wedding." And that's when they told me exactly how much they expected me to contribute, and exactly what would happen if I refused. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The moment that changed everything happened between the main course and dessert, right after Dad refilled everyone's wine glasses, and Mom brought out her special dessert plates, the ones she only used when she wanted something important. "Victoria, honey," Mom began, smoothing the tablecloth in front of her with those perfectly manicured nails that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. "We've been doing some calculations for Delilah's wedding, and we're going to need your help." I set down my fork, already feeling the familiar knot forming in my stomach. 28 years of experience had taught me to recognize the setup. The special dinner, the wine, the build-up, this wasn't going to be a request. This was going to be a demand disguised as family obligation. "What kind of help?" I asked, though I already suspected where this was heading. Dad cleared his throat and pulled out a folder from beside his chair, because of course he had prepared materials. He spread several sheets of paper across the table between the wine glasses and dinner plates, transforming our family dining room into an impromptu business meeting. "We've broken down all the wedding expenses," he said, pointing to a meticulously organized spreadsheet. "The venue, catering, flowers, photography, music, dress, honeymoon, everything Delilah needs for her perfect day." I glanced at the numbers, my financial training automatically calculating totals even as my heart sank. $75,000. For one day. The venue alone was $30,000, more than many people made in a year. "It's going to be magical," Delilah chimed in from across the table, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured enthusiastically. "Jonathan's family is contributing $25,000, and his parents are covering the rehearsal dinner separately. Mom and Dad are putting in $30,000 from their savings." "Wait," I interrupted, looking up from the spreadsheet. "$30,000 from savings? What savings?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Dad adjusted his tie, and Mom suddenly became very interested in rearranging the salt and pepper shakers. We're Managing our contribution, Mom said carefully. The important thing is that we're still short $20,000, and we were hoping that I would cover it, I finished for her. You're doing so well with your little real estate projects, Dad said, his tone taking on that slightly condescending quality that suggested he still thought of my investments as a hobby rather than a serious business. $20,000 is probably just one of those house deals for you, right? I stared at them, genuinely speechless for a moment. $20,000 wasn't just one house deal. It was months of careful planning, renovation work, market analysis, and risk management. It was money I'd earned by getting up at 5 a.m. to check on contractors, by spending weekends learning plumbing and electrical work, by making hundreds of calculated decisions that had slowly built my financial independence. And it's not like you have any major expenses coming up, Mom added, warming to her theme. You don't have a wedding to plan? You're still in that little apartment? You don't even have a car payment. This money would just be sitting in your account anyway. The casual dismissal of my life choices hit like a slap. My little apartment was a carefully chosen investment in a neighborhood I'd researched extensively. My lack of a car payment was because I'd bought my Honda Civic with cash and maintained it meticulously. My wedding-free status was a deliberate choice to focus on building my career and financial security. Besides, Delilah said, leaning forward with that practiced look of vulnerability she'd perfected over the years, you're going to be my maid of honor. This is your chance to really be part of making my dream come true. And there it was, the emotional manipulation wrapped in family obligation and tied up with a bow of guilt. I was supposed to feel honored to fund my sister's extravagant wedding. I was supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to sacrifice my financial goals for her special day. What if I say no? I asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dad's jaw tightened, and Mom's expression shifted from persuasive to cold in the span of a heartbeat. Why would you say no? Mom asked, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. This is your sister we're talking about, your family. Because $20,000 is a lot of money, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. And because I've already helped with her rent, her car payments, her credit card debt, Those were loans, Dad interrupted sharply. And we're not asking for a loan this time. We're asking you to be part of your sister's wedding, to be part of this family. The implication was clear. Refuse to pay, and I wouldn't be part of the family anymore. I need time to think about it, I said, standing up from the table. What's to think about? Delilah's voice rose, tears already forming in her eyes. This is my wedding, Victoria, the most important day of my life, and you need to think about whether you want to help me? It's not about wanting to help. It's exactly about that, Mom said, standing as well. For 28 years, your father and I have provided for you, supported you, given you every opportunity. And now, when your sister needs your help for one day, the most important day of her life, you need to think about it? I looked around the table at my family. Dad's face was red with anger, his hands clenched into fists beside his wine glass. Mom's expression was ice cold, the warmth from earlier in the evening completely gone. Delilah was crying now, real tears streaming down her face as she stared at me with a look of betrayal that made my chest ache. This was the moment I'd been avoiding my entire life. The moment when I stopped being the reliable daughter, the responsible sister, the family member who always said yes. The moment when I chose my own financial security over their demands. I can't, I said simply. I'm sorry, but I can't give you $20,000 for a wedding. The explosion was immediate. Can't or won't? Dad shouted, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood. Because there's a big difference, Victoria. You're being selfish, Mom said, her voice shaking with rage. Selfish and cruel, after everything we've done for you. I'm not being selfish, I said, my own voice rising. I'm being responsible. $20,000 is my emergency fund. It's my security. It's money I worked for and saved and money you wouldn't even have if we hadn't raised you and educated you, and I paid for my own education. The words came out louder than I intended, cutting through the chaos. I worked 2 jobs through college. I took out loans. I've been paying my own way since I was 18 years old. Delilah's sobs filled the silence that followed. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, mascara streaming down her cheeks. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she whispered. "I can't believe my own sister would ruin my wedding." And that's when I realized there was no winning this fight. No amount of explanation or reasoning would make them understand that their demand was unreasonable. In their minds, I was the family bank account, and refusing to pay was an act of betrayal that couldn't be forgiven. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, leaving behind the dinner plates and the spreadsheet and the family that had just shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities. What I didn't know was that walking out that door would trigger a chain of events that would give me more power over their lives than they'd ever had over mine. The foreclosure notice was already in the mail. The drive back to my apartment in downtown Hartford felt like an escape from a crime scene. My hands were still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, replaying the dinner conversation over and over in my mind. $20,000. They'd asked for $20,000 like it was pocket change, like it was something I owed them simply for existing. But this wasn't the first time. It wasn't even close. Let me tell you about the pattern that had defined my entire relationship with my family, because understanding the history makes what happened next so much sweeter. It started when I was 16 and got my first real job at Morrison's Garden Center, a local nursery where I spent weekends loading mulch and watering plants for $8 an hour. I was saving for a car, a beat-up Toyota Corolla I'd found in the classifieds for $3,000. After 6 months of working every weekend and most weekday afternoons, I'd finally saved up enough for the down payment. That's when Delilah, 13 at the time, decided she needed a new laptop for school. Not just any laptop, a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro that cost twice what my car was worth. When Mom and Dad couldn't afford it, they turned to me with that same expression I'd see countless times over the next 12 years. "Victoria," Mom had said, cornering me in my bedroom while I counted out my carefully saved bills. "Delilah really needs this laptop for her advanced classes. You understand how important her education is, right?" I understood that my education was apparently less important, since I was still using a 5-year-old hand-me-down computer that took 10 minutes to boot up. But I also understood the unspoken threat, refuse, and face weeks of cold shoulders, guilt trips, and family meetings about my quit selfishness. I gave them $1,500 for Delilah's laptop and bought a 10-year-old Honda Civic instead. It had 180,000 miles and a rattle in the engine, but it got me to work and back. Delilah's laptop lasted 2 years before she decided she needed an upgrade. The pattern was set. Every time Delilah wanted something beyond my parents' budget, I became the solution. Spring break trip to Cancun when she was in high school? "Victoria, you're so good with money. Could you help out?" Designer prom dress that cost more than my monthly rent? It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, honey. Family helps family. College was when things really escalated. While I worked 2 jobs and lived on ramen noodles to pay for my business degree at the University of Connecticut, Delilah was accepted to Parsons School of Design in Manhattan with dreams of becoming a fashion designer. The tuition was astronomical, but my parents were determined to make it happen. "She's so talented," Mom would say whenever I questioned the financial wisdom of a $40,000 a year art school. "This is her passion, Victoria. You wouldn't want her to give up her dreams, would you?" My dreams, apparently, were less worthy of financial support. I graduated with $35,000 in student loan debt, while Delilah graduated debt-free, thanks to a combination of my parents' credit cards, borrowed money from relatives, and regular contributions from my part-time job income. But the real kicker came after graduation. While I was working 60-hour weeks at a small accounting firm, trying to pay off my loans and build a career, Delilah decided that fashion design wasn't for her after all. She wanted to be a lifestyle blogger instead, specifically a lifestyle blogger living in a trendy Brooklyn apartment and documenting her fabulous city life for Instagram. The rent on her studio apartment was $3,000 a month, more than I was paying for my modest 2-bedroom place in Hartford. When she couldn't afford it after 6 months of unsuccessful blogging, guess who got the phone call? "It's just temporary," Dad had assured me when he called to ask for help with her rent. "She's building her brand. These things take time." I ended up sending $800 a month for nearly a year, while Delilah built her brand by posting photos of expensive brunches and designer handbags. When I finally asked to see her blog analytics, actual business metrics like any real entrepreneur would track, She burst into tears and accused me of not believing in her dreams. That was my mistake for 28 years. I kept believing that if I was reasonable enough, supportive enough, generous enough, my family would eventually recognize that I had my own dreams and financial goals. I kept thinking that if I just helped out one more time, they'd finally appreciate my sacrifices and stop asking for more. The real wake-up call came 18 months ago when I discovered that my parents had listed me as a co-signer on Delilah's credit cards without my knowledge. I only found out when a collection agency called my apartment looking for payment on $7,000 in unpaid debt. Delilah had maxed out 3 cards buying clothes and travel, then simply stopped paying when the bills got too high. When I confronted my parents about the unauthorized co-signing, Dad's response was, "We knew you'd want to help if you understood how serious the situation was." They'd forged my signature on financial documents, they'd tied my credit to Delilah's irresponsible spending, and they acted like it was a favor to me, like they were giving me the opportunity to be a good sister. That's when I stopped being reactive and started being strategic. I spent the next year quietly building my real estate portfolio while publicly acting like the same financially reliable daughter they'd always counted on. I attended family dinners, smiled at Delilah's latest expensive adventures, and kept my investment successes to myself. They thought I was still working a regular accounting job with a modest salary. They had no idea I'd transitioned to full-time real estate investing and was making more money than my father's pharmaceutical sales position. More importantly, they had no idea I'd started studying debt acquisition as an investment strategy. BIJ. It began as research for my real estate business. Understanding how mortgages moved through the financial system, how banks sold off troubled loans, how debt collection worked, these were all valuable skills for someone buying distressed properties. But the more I learned, the more I realized there were opportunities beyond just real estate. Debt is a commodity, just like any other investment. Banks and credit unions regularly sell portfolios of loans to free up capital and reduce risk. Most people don't know this happens. They keep making payments to the same bank, never knowing their loan has been sold and resold multiple times. But with the right connections and enough capital, you can buy debt at a significant discount and either collect on it or resell it for profit. I started small, buying individual loans from online platforms that connected investors with debt sellers. A few $100s here and there, learning the process, understanding the legal requirements. It was fascinating work that combined financial analysis with legal research and negotiation skills. 6 months ago, when that portfolio of 17 distressed mortgages became available through a debt acquisition company in Boston, I was ready to make a major purchase. The total cost was $85,000 for loans, with a face value of over $2 million. Most of the properties were underwater, meaning the owners owed more than the homes were worth. But I'd done my research. The Hartford area real estate market was recovering, and I estimated that even with losses on some loans, the portfolio would be profitable within 3 years. I didn't realize my parents' mortgage was in the portfolio until I was reviewing the individual loan documents 2 weeks after the purchase. When I saw Robert and Evelyn Hartwell, 847 Rosewood Lane, Millbrook Heights, in the paperwork, I actually laughed out loud in my apartment. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Their mortgage was 3 months behind on payments and had been marked for foreclosure proceedings. Based on the payment history, they'd been struggling financially for over a year, probably around the time they started planning Delilah's extravagant wedding. For a moment, I considered selling their loan back or transferring it to another investor. Mixing family and business seemed like a recipe for complications I didn't need, but then I remembered the forged co-signing. The years of guilt trips. The assumption that my money was always available for their priorities, while my own goals were dismissed as selfish. I decided to hold on to the loan and see what developed. Now, sitting in my car outside my apartment building after walking out of their dinner party, I realized what was about to develop. In exactly 72 hours, the foreclosure notice would arrive in their mailbox with my name listed as the creditor. They wanted to treat me like a bank? Fine. They were about to learn exactly how banks operate when payments are missed. The next morning brought 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. I woke up to my phone buzzing incessantly on my nightstand, the screen lighting up with variations of the same desperate themes: guilt, manipulation, and increasingly frantic demands that I reconsider my selfish decision. The first voicemail was from Mom, her voice saccharine sweet with just an edge of steel underneath. "Victoria, honey, I know you were upset last night, but we're family. We work these things out. Call me back so we can discuss this like adults." The messages progressively got more desperate. Dad's voicemail at 6:47 a.m. was clipped and angry. "Victoria, this tantrum has gone on long enough. Your sister is planning her wedding, and you're going to help. Period. Call me back immediately." But it was Delilah's messages that truly showcased the family's manipulation playbook. Voice message after voice message of tears, accusations, and emotional blackmail that would have made a therapist rich just analyzing the dysfunction. "Vic, I can't believe you're doing this to me. I thought you loved me. I thought I could count on my big sister when it mattered most. How am I supposed to tell Jonathan that my own family won't support our wedding? What's he going to think of us?" I deleted the voicemails without listening to them all and headed to my office. I had a property inspection scheduled in West Hartford, and unlike my family's drama, real estate was something I could actually control. But they weren't done. Around noon, while I was reviewing contractor estimates for a kitchen renovation, my office phone rang. The receptionist at the small business complex where I rented space knocked on my door. "Victoria, there's a woman here who says she's your mother. She's asking to see you. And she seems upset." I looked through the window of my office door and saw Mom standing in the reception area, dressed in her best guilt trip outfit, the navy blue dress she wore to church, pearls, and an expression of wounded motherhood that could have won an Academy Award. Against my better judgment, I let her in. "Victoria," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk like she was visiting a therapist, instead of ambushing me at work. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "You made your position pretty clear last night." "Oh, honey." She reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue, dabbing at eyes that weren't actually wet. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not demanding anything from you. We're asking for help. Family asks family for help." "You had spreadsheets," I pointed out. "You had a planned presentation. You assigned me a $20,000 portion of Delilah's wedding like it was a done deal." "Because we know how generous you are," she said, leaning forward with that practiced look of maternal concern. "We know how much you love your sister. We just wanted to make it easy for you to contribute." Easy. As if handing over $20,000 was equivalent to bringing a casserole to a potluck dinner. "Mom," I said carefully, "I'm not contributing to the wedding. At all. Not $20,000, not $2,000, not $20. This is Delilah's choice, and it's your choice to support it. It's not my responsibility." The mask slipped, just for a moment. I saw the flash of anger cross her face before she smoothed it back into hurt confusion. "I don't understand why you're being so cruel," she said, her voice taking on that trembling quality that had guilted me into compliance for decades. "This is your sister's wedding, the most important day of her life, and you're willing to ruin it over money?" "I'm not ruining anything," I said, standing up from my desk. "I'm choosing not to fund something I can't afford and don't agree with." "Can't afford?" She laughed, a sharp sound that echoed in my small office. "Victoria, don't lie to me. I know you're doing well with these little property investments. $20,000 is nothing to you now." There it was again, the casual dismissal of my work as little property investments, as if my business success was some kind of hobby that existed solely to fund their lifestyle choices. "Even if I could afford it," I said, "I wouldn't. This wedding is excessive, unnecessary, and frankly irresponsible given your financial situation." "Our financial situation?" Her voice rose an octave. "What do you know about our financial situation?" I almost laughed. If she only knew exactly how much I knew about their financial situation. 3 months behind on their mortgage. Maxed out credit cards. A home equity line of credit that was approaching its limit. A retirement account that had been borrowed against so many times, it was essentially empty. But I wasn't ready to reveal that hand yet. "I know enough," I said simply. "I know that you can't afford to spend $75,000 on a wedding." I know that you've been struggling financially for over a year, and I know that instead of scaling back or being responsible, you decided to make it my problem." Mom's face went white, then red, then white again. She stood up so quickly that her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you judge us? After everything we've done for you, after all the sacrifices we've made, you have the audacity to lecture us about money? What sacrifices?" The words came out harsher than I intended. "What exactly did you sacrifice for me that you didn't also give to Delilah? Actually, what did you give me that you didn't give her double?" "We raised you," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "We fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head. That's called being a parent," I interrupted. "That's the basic legal requirement of having children. You don't get to bill me for doing the bare minimum of parenting, and then use it to justify making me pay for Delilah's wedding." The silence that followed was deafening. We stared at each other across my desk, 28 years of resentment and manipulation hanging in the air between us. Finally, Mom picked up her purse and walked toward the door. She paused with her hand on the handle and turned back to me. "Your father and I raised 2 daughters," she said, her voice cold as winter. "We're very proud of one of them. The other one seems to have forgotten what family means." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the parking lot below. Part of me felt guilty, the part that had been trained from childhood to prioritize family harmony over everything else. But a bigger part of me felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I had said no to my family and meant it. I hadn't negotiated, compromised, or found a middle ground that left me financially depleted and emotionally exhausted. I had simply said no. My phone buzzed with another text from Delilah. "Mom told me about your conversation. I can't believe how selfish you're being. This is my wedding, the most important day of my life, and you're ruining it because you care more about money than family." I turned off my phone and went back to reviewing contractor estimates. Unlike family drama, construction costs were straightforward. You either had the money or you didn't. You either wanted to make the investment or you didn't. No one expected you to pay for someone else's dream kitchen just because you shared DNA. That evening, as I was making dinner in my small but efficient apartment kitchen, I heard a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw Dad standing in the hallway, holding a manila folder and wearing the same expression he'd worn when I was 16 and had dented his car backing out of the driveway. I considered not answering. I considered pretending I wasn't home. But something told me this conversation was inevitable, and it was better to have it on my terms, in my space. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Victoria," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of paternal authority that assumed compliance. "We need to settle this nonsense tonight." "There's nothing to settle," I replied, keeping my hand on the door. "I'm not paying for Delilah's wedding, that's final." He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of whiskey on his breath. Dad wasn't much of a drinker, which meant this conversation was already going worse than I'd anticipated. "Do you know what you're doing to your sister?" he asked, his voice rising. "Do you understand that you're destroying her happiness over money that means nothing to you?" "It means nothing to me?" I laughed, genuinely incredulous. "Dad, $20,000 is 8 months of my living expenses. It's a down payment on an investment property. It's financial security. How does it mean nothing to me?" "Because you have plenty more where that came from," he said, opening the manila folder and pulling out several sheets of paper. "Don't think we don't know about your little real estate empire." My blood ran cold as I recognized the documents in his hands. Property records, purchase agreements, loan applications. Somehow, they'd been researching my business holdings. "You own 7 rental properties," he continued, reading from what appeared to be a printout from the county assessor's office. "Combined value of over $1.2 million. Annual rental income of approximately $96,000. And you're telling us you can't afford $20,000 to help your sister?" I stared at him, my mind racing. How had they gotten access to property records? How long had they been investigating my finances? And more importantly, what else did they know? "How I spend my money is none of your business," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "Everything about this family is our business," he replied, his voice taking on a threatening edge. "And we're not going to let you sabotage Delilah's wedding because you've gotten too big for your britches." That's when I realized this wasn't just about the wedding money anymore. This was about control. This was about putting me back in my place as the family ATM, the reliable daughter who never said no. They'd made a critical miscalculation, though. They thought knowledge of my financial success would make me more likely to contribute. They thought proving I could afford it would guilt me into compliance. They had no idea they'd just handed me the perfect motivation to show them exactly what kind of power real money could buy. "You're right," I said, stepping back and preparing to close the door. "I can afford $20,000. I can afford a lot more than that. Which is exactly why I'm not giving it to you." I closed the door and turned the deadbolt, listening to Dad pound on the door and shout about family loyalty and respect. But I was done listening to their demands. In 72 hours, they'd receive a different kind of mail. And then we'd see who really held the power in this family. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday morning at exactly 10:47 a.m. I know the precise time because I was sitting in my car across the street from 847 Rosewood Lane, watching the mail carrier make his rounds through the neighborhood where I'd grown up. I hadn't planned to be there when it happened. I'd been driving to a property showing in nearby Bloomfield when I realized I was only 3 blocks from my parents' house. Something, curiosity maybe, or a sense of poetic justice, made me turn down their street just as the postal truck was pulling up to their mailbox. From my vantage point, I could see Mom through the kitchen window, probably preparing her second cup of coffee and planning whatever guilt campaign she'd launch next. Dad's car was gone, which meant he was already at work, likely telling his colleagues about his ungrateful daughter who refused to support family values. The mail carrier stuffed the usual bundle of letters and advertisements into their mailbox, but I could see the certified mail receipt that required a signature, the foreclosure notice that would change everything. Mom would have to sign for it, which meant she'd know immediately that this wasn't routine correspondence. I drove away before she came outside, but I couldn't shake the image of that certified mail envelope sitting in their mailbox like a ticking bomb. 3 hours later, my phone exploded. Upside, the first call came while I was reviewing lease agreements with a potential tenant for my property in West Hartford. I declined the call when I saw Dad's name on the screen, but he called back immediately. Then again. Then Mom called. Then Delilah. Then Dad again. Busy. By the time I finished with my tenant meeting, I had 14 missed calls and counting. I drove to a quiet coffee shop downtown before listening to the voicemails, needing neutral territory for whatever chaos was about to unfold. Dad's first message was pure panic. "Victoria, call me back immediately. There's been some kind of mistake with our mortgage. We need to talk, now." The second message, 20 minutes later, was anger. "Victoria, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this isn't funny. Call me back." But it was the third message that told me they'd figured it out. Dad's voice was barely controlled rage, mixed with disbelief. "You bought our mortgage. Our own daughter bought our mortgage and didn't tell us. What kind of sick person does something like that?" Mom's voicemails were pure hysteria. "Victoria, please call us back. Please. I don't understand what's happening. The bank says you own our house now. How is that possible? Please just call us back and explain what's going on." Delilah's messages were exactly what I expected: dramatic, accusatory, and completely self-centered. "I don't know what you did, but Mom is crying and Dad is furious and you're ruining my engagement. Whatever this is about, fix it. My wedding is in 4 months and I'm not letting you destroy it with your mind games." I sat in my car in the coffee shop parking lot, holding my phone and feeling something I'd never experienced before in relation to my family: complete and total power. For 28 years, they'd held all the cards. They controlled the guilt, the manipulation, the family dynamics. They decided when to include me and when to shut me out. They determined what constituted family loyalty and what counted as selfish behavior. Now I held their financial future in my hands, and they had no idea what to do with that reality. I waited 2 hours before calling back. Const Torazel. Dad answered on the first ring. "Victoria." His voice was tight, controlled, like he was speaking through clenched teeth. "Hi, Dad," I said, keeping my tone casual. "You called?" "Don't you dare act like you don't know what this is about," he said. "We got a foreclosure notice today. With your name on it. As the creditor." "Oh, that," I said, as if I'd just remembered a minor detail. "Yeah, I bought your mortgage about 6 months ago. It was part of a portfolio deal." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "You bought our mortgage," he repeated slowly, like he was trying to make sense of a foreign language. "Technically, I bought a portfolio of 17 distressed mortgages from First National Bank when they were cleaning up their books. Yours happened to be included. I didn't specifically target your loan. It was just part of the package." Another silence. Then, "And you didn't think to mention this to us?" "Why would I?" I asked. "You were making payments to the bank. Now you make payments to me. Nothing changes from your perspective." "Nothing changes?" His voice rose an octave. "Our daughter owns our mortgage and nothing changes?" "Well," I said, allowing a slight edge to creep into my voice, "something does change when payments stop being made. According to my records, you're 3 months behind. That's what triggers foreclosure proceedings." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. In the background, I caught the sound of Mom crying and what sounded like Delilah's voice getting increasingly shrill. "We had some temporary cash flow issues," Dad said, his voice defensive. "We were planning to catch up on the payments after I paid for Delilah's wedding?" I finished for him. The silence that followed was deafening. We weren't." He struggled to find words that wouldn't admit what we both knew was true. They'd been planning to use my $20,000 to catch up on their mortgage payments while still funding Delilah's extravagant wedding. "Dad," I said, my voice calm and businesslike, "as the current holder of your mortgage, I'm required by law to follow standard foreclosure procedures when payments are missed. You've missed 3 payments totaling $8,470. Unless that amount is paid within 30 days, I'm obligated to proceed with foreclosure." "You're threatening to foreclose on your own parents?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm not threatening anything," I replied. "I'm explaining the legal reality of mortgage default. This is how debt collection works. Surely you understand that you did co-sign Delilah for those credit cards that went into collections." That hit home. I could practically hear him deflating on the other end of the line. "Victoria," he said, his voice suddenly smaller, "we're family. We can work this out as family." "Family," I repeated thoughtfully. "You mean like when you forged my signature on financial documents? Or when you spent last weekend researching my property holdings to try to guilt me into funding a wedding I can't afford? That kind of family?" "You said you couldn't afford $20,000, Mom's voice came through the phone, apparently on speaker now. "But you had enough money to buy mortgages?" "I said I wouldn't spend $20,000 on Delilah's wedding," I corrected. "There's a difference between can't afford and won't spend. I won't spend my investment capital on a party." "A party?" Delilah's voice screeched in the background. "It's my wedding. It's the most important day of my life. And my mortgage payments are the most important part of my financial stability," I replied calmly. Funny how everyone's priorities seem so different when it's their money on the line. Dad cleared his throat, and I could tell he was trying to regain control of the conversation. "Okay, let's all take a step back here. Victoria, what do you want? What's it going to take to resolve this situation?" What did I want? For the first time in years, someone in my family was asking what I wanted instead of telling me what I should do. "I want you to treat me like any other creditor," I said. "Make your payments on time, follow the terms of your mortgage agreement, and maintain your property adequately. That's all any mortgage holder expects. And if we can't make the payments?" Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then I'll follow the same procedures any bank would follow," I replied. "I'll work with you on a payment plan if possible, but I'm not going to carry non-performing debt indefinitely." "But we're your parents," Dad said, his voice carrying a note of desperation I'd never heard before. "Yes," I agreed. "You're my parents, which makes it even more disappointing that you've put me in this position." The conversation ended with promises to, quote, "figure something out," and demands that I fix this mess, but I could hear the panic underneath their words. For the first time in their lives, they were dealing with consequences they couldn't manipulate or guilt-trip their way out of. That evening, I received a text from my Uncle Paul, Dad's younger brother. Heard about the family drama. Don't know all the details, but wanted you to know I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. That family has been walking all over you for years. It was the first message of support I'd received from any family member, and it meant more than he probably realized. The next morning brought a new development. Delilah had apparently decided that if she couldn't guilt me directly, she'd try public pressure instead. I woke up to find myself tagged in 17 Instagram posts and 12 Facebook updates, all variations on the same theme. Her heartbreak over her sister's betrayal during her most important time. The posts were carefully crafted to make me look like a monster without actually explaining what I'd done. She was too smart to admit publicly that the family was facing foreclosure. But she'd underestimated my understanding of social media and public relations. By noon, I'd posted my own response, a simple, factual statement. Sometimes being a responsible family member means not enabling financial irresponsibility, even when it's unpopular. I love my family, which is why I won't participate in decisions that could harm their long-term financial stability. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers began commenting with their own stories of family financial manipulation and praise for setting boundaries. Within hours, Delilah had deleted her posts. The truth was finally out, and it wasn't the narrative my family had expected to control. The family emergency meeting was called for Friday evening at 6 p.m. sharp. The text from Mom arrived Wednesday afternoon. Formal and ominous. Family meeting Friday. Your presence is required. We're going to resolve this situation once and for all. Required, as if I were still a teenager being summoned to explain why I'd missed curfew. I almost didn't go. Every instinct told me it was a trap, another attempt to corner me in their house with their rules, surrounded by childhood memories and emotional manipulation. But curiosity won out. I wanted to see what card they thought they still had left to play. I arrived exactly on time to find the house unusually crowded. Mom and Dad were in their usual spots in the living room, but they weren't alone. Delilah sat on the couch, flanked by her fiancé Jonathan, the first time I'd ever seen him at a family meeting. More surprising was the presence of Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, and Uncle Mark, Mom's brother, both looking distinctly uncomfortable. They'd called in reinforcements. "Victoria," Dad said as I entered the room, his voice carrying forced warmth. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." The only available seat was a small chair that had been positioned directly across from the couch, facing the entire assembled family like I was about to be interrogated. I remained standing. "I'll hear what you have to say from here," I said. Mom's smile was brittle as glass. "Honey, we've asked family to join us tonight because we think you need to hear some outside perspectives on this situation." "Outside perspectives," I repeated. "From people you specifically chose and briefed beforehand." Uncle Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Victoria, we're just concerned about the family dynamic here. This situation is getting out of hand." "What situation?" I asked. "The situation where I'm refusing to fund a $75,000 wedding, or the situation where my parents defaulted on their mortgage?" "The situation," Aunt Linda said firmly, "where you're threatening to foreclose on your own parents over money." There it was, the narrative they'd crafted for family consumption. I wasn't a creditor dealing with non-payment. I was a greedy daughter threatening her loving parents over money. "I'm not threatening foreclosure," I said calmly. "I'm following the legal procedures required when mortgage payments aren't made. If they'd been making payments, we wouldn't be having this conversation." "But you bought their mortgage," Jonathan said, speaking for the first time. His voice carried that particular brand of entitled confusion that came from never having had to deal with financial consequences. "Why would you do something like that?" "It was an investment opportunity," I replied. "I bought a portfolio of distressed debt. I didn't specifically target their mortgage. It was just part of a larger package." "But when you realized it was their house," Delilah said, her voice rising, "you should have done something. You should have told them, Or sold it back, or what? I interrupted. Forgiven the debt? Ignored the missed payments? Pretended that family relationships exempt people from financial obligations? Yes, she practically shouted. That's exactly what you should have done. That's what family means. I looked around the room at the assembled relatives, all nodding in agreement like Delilah had just recited the 10 Commandments. So family means that I should absorb financial losses, ignore business obligations, and fund other people's lifestyle choices because we share DNA? I asked. Family means putting family first, Dad said, his voice taking on that parental authority tone that had worked so well when I was 16. It means making sacrifices for the people you love. What sacrifices have any of you made for me? The question came out sharper than I'd intended, cutting through the room like a blade. The silence was deafening. I've been making sacrifices for this family since I was 16 years old, I continued, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I gave up my car money for Delilah's laptop. I worked 2 jobs through college while you funded her art school education. I've paid for her rent, her credit card debt, her car repairs, and dozens of other emergencies over the years. When have any of you sacrificed anything for me? We raised you, Mom said, her voice defensive. We fed you, clothed you. You raised 2 children, I cut her off. You fed and clothed both of us. But only one of us has been expected to pay back that basic parental care with decades of financial support. Aunt Linda leaned forward, trying to look sympathetic. Victoria, honey, I think you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. This isn't about keeping score. You're right, I said. It's not about keeping score. It's about respect. It's about treating me like an adult instead of a piggy bank. It's about acknowledging that I have my own financial goals and responsibilities. Your responsibility is to your family, Uncle Mark said firmly. Everything else comes second. According to who? I asked. According to the same family that forged my signature on financial documents? The same family that's been researching my private business holdings to use against me? The same family that called this meeting to pressure me into compliance? Jonathan cleared his throat. Look, Victoria, I don't know all the history here, but I do know that Delilah is devastated. This is supposed to be the happiest time of her life, and instead, she's dealing with family drama and financial stress. Financial stress, I repeated slowly. You mean the financial stress of planning a $75,000 wedding while your future in-laws are 3 months behind on their mortgage? His face went white. Clearly, Delilah hadn't shared that particular detail with him. Maybe, I continued, the solution isn't pressuring me to pay for an extravagant wedding. Maybe the solution is planning a wedding you can actually afford. We can afford it, Dad said quickly, shooting a warning look at Jonathan. We just need to restructure some things. Work out a payment plan. With me, I said. You need to work out a payment plan with me. Because I'm your creditor now. And as your creditor, I have to tell you that taking on additional debt for a wedding while you're already in default isn't financially sound. The room erupted. You're being ridiculous, Delilah shrieked. It's my wedding, the most important day of my life. You're punishing us for asking for help, Mom accused. This is financial abuse, Aunt Linda declared. You're tearing this family apart, Uncle Mark added. Dad stood up, his face red with anger. Enough. Victoria, here's what's going to happen. You're going to forgive the back payments, give us reasonable terms going forward, and contribute to Delilah's wedding. Period. Because if you don't, you're no longer part of this family. The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical presence, the same threat they'd made dozens of times over the years, but this time with the full weight of assembled family behind it. For a moment, I felt the old familiar panic, the terror of being cut off, alone, rejected by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. It was a fear they'd cultivated carefully over the years, the understanding that compliance was the price of belonging. But then I thought about the mortgage documents sitting in my office, the rental properties generating passive income, the business I'd built without their help or approval, the life I'd created that had nothing to do with their validation. Okay, I said simply. The word seemed to surprise everyone, including myself. Okay, Mom repeated, hope creeping into her voice. Okay, I'm no longer part of this family, I clarified. If that's the price of maintaining my financial boundaries and business ethics, then I accept it. The silence that followed was different from the others. This wasn't shocked silence or angry silence. This was the silence of people realizing they'd just played their biggest card and lost. "You don't mean that," Delilah said, her voice small and uncertain. "I absolutely mean it," I replied. "For 28 years, I've been part of a family that valued my money more than my well-being. I've been the reliable daughter, the responsible sister, the family safety net. And what has it gotten me? Forged signatures, financial manipulation, and ultimatums." I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Since I'm no longer family, our relationship is now purely business. You have 30 days to bring your mortgage current, or I'll proceed with foreclosure. If you need to discuss payment arrangements, you can contact my attorney." "Victoria, wait," Dad called out, but I was already through the door. As I walked to my car, I heard the chaos erupting behind me. Raised voices, accusations, Delilah's dramatic sobs. But for the first time in my adult life, it wasn't my chaos to manage. I drove home to my quiet apartment, poured a glass of wine, and opened my laptop to draft an email to my attorney. If they wanted to treat this as a business relationship, then I'd give them exactly that: professional, impersonal, and governed by contracts instead of emotional manipulation. The family that had spent decades taking my money had just lost access to both my finances and my compliance. They'd played their final card and discovered it was worth exactly nothing. Now they'd learn what it really meant to deal with Victoria Hartwell as a creditor instead of a daughter. Monday morning brought the first volley in what would become an all-out war. I was reviewing tenant applications for my duplex in East Hartford when my business phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was unfortunately familiar. "Victoria Hartwell?" The voice was crisp, professional, with just enough authority to make most people nervous. "Speaking. This is attorney Bradley Thornton from Thornton Mills and Associates. I represent Robert and Evelyn Hartwell in a matter concerning predatory lending practices and potential elder financial abuse." I almost laughed. They'd hired a lawyer to accuse me of elder abuse for enforcing the terms of a mortgage they'd defaulted on. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "And what exactly do you need from me, Mr. Thornton?" "My clients are alleging that you deliberately targeted them for debt acquisition as part of a scheme to manipulate family relationships and extract financial concessions through coercion. We're prepared to file complaints with both the State Banking Commission and the Federal Consumer Financial Protection Bureau." The threat was carefully worded, just vague enough to avoid being frivolous, but specific enough to suggest serious legal consequences. It was exactly the kind of intimidation tactic that would have sent me into a panic 6 months ago. But 6 months ago, I hadn't owned 17 rental properties and a portfolio of performing loans. 6 months ago, I didn't have Thomas Rowe as my attorney. "I'll have my legal counsel contact you to arrange a meeting," I said calmly. "In the meantime, the mortgage remains in default, and standard foreclosure procedures will continue as scheduled." "Miss Hartwell," Thornton's voice took on a warning tone, "I'd strongly advise you to reconsider your position before this matter escalates further. Elder financial abuse carries serious criminal penalties." "Thank you for the legal advice," I replied. "My attorney will be in touch." I hung up and immediately called Thomas Rowe, the attorney who'd helped me structure my real estate investments and had been handling my debt acquisition contracts. If my family wanted to escalate this to a legal battle, they'd picked the wrong opponent. Thomas answered on the second ring. "Victoria, what's the crisis today?" I'd been working with Thomas for 3 years, and he'd learned that my calls usually meant either a great investment opportunity or a complicated legal situation. Today was definitely the latter. My family hired an attorney to accuse me of elder financial abuse for foreclosing on their mortgage, I said without preamble. "The mortgage you bought as part of that portfolio deal 6 months ago?" "The very same." Thomas was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him pulling up files on his computer. "Refresh my memory. Did you know their mortgage was in the portfolio when you purchased it?" I had no idea until I reviewed the individual loan documents weeks after the purchase. By then, they were already 3 months in default. And when did they find out you owned the mortgage? Last Tuesday, when they received the foreclosure notice. Perfect, Thomas said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Victoria, this is what we call a nuisance lawsuit. They're hoping to scare you into settling rather than fighting. The problem for them is that you have documentation proving every aspect of your purchase was legitimate business practice. So what do? We show them exactly how expensive it gets when you make false accusations against someone with good legal representation. I'll contact this Thornton character and explain the realities of federal debt collection law. In the meantime, document everything. Every phone call, every text message, every family member who shows up at your office. I didn't have to wait long for the next escalation. That afternoon, while I was meeting with a contractor about kitchen renovations at my Bloomfield property, I received a call from my property management company. Victoria, we've got a problem, said Janet, the office manager who handled my rental applications. Someone called all of our current tenants today, claiming to be from a credit monitoring service. They were asking questions about their landlord's financial stability and suggesting they might want to look for alternative housing. My blood ran cold. Someone called my tenants? All of them. Mrs. Chen from the duplex on Maple Street was particularly upset. The caller told her that her landlord was under investigation for financial crimes and that her lease might not be valid if you were arrested. This was no longer about a wedding or a mortgage. This was a deliberate attempt to destroy my business by spreading false information and creating panic among my tenants. Did anyone get a name or number from the caller? Mrs. Chen did. She said the woman claimed to be from Hartford Credit Services, but when she asked for a callback number, the caller said they'd follow up by mail. There was no such company as Hartford Credit Services. I'd checked. Janet, send an email to all tenants immediately. Explain that there are no issues with their leases, that someone is spreading false information about our company, and that any legitimate business concerns should come directly through our office. Already done, she said. But Victoria, 2 of the tenants from the Oak Street property called to ask about breaking their leases early. This could get expensive if people start moving out. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the Bloomfield property, hands shaking with rage. They weren't just coming after me personally anymore. They were attacking my livelihood, my tenants, my professional reputation. This had crossed every line of reasonable family conflict. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Enjoying your day? This is just the beginning. Pay up or watch everything you built fall apart. A concerned family member. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Thomas immediately. His response came back within minutes. File a police report for harassment. Now. Then get me everything you have on who might have access to your tenant information. The police report took 2 hours and felt surreal. Sitting in the Hartford Police Department, explaining to Officer Martinez that my own family was waging a campaign of financial terrorism against my business sounded like something from a soap opera. So your parents hired a lawyer to claim you're financially abusing them, Officer Martinez repeated, taking notes, while simultaneously harassing your tenants and threatening your business? That's correct. And this all started because you refused to pay for your sister's wedding? That's correct. He shook his head. I've seen family disputes over money before, but this is next level. The threatening text message gives us something to work with, especially since it directly references the other harassment. What happens now? We'll investigate the tenant harassment calls, and I'll make sure there's a paper trail on the threatening message. If the pattern continues, we can look at restraining orders. Driving home that evening, I realized my family had made a critical miscalculation. They thought I was still the compliant daughter who would crumble under pressure. They thought threatening my business would force me to capitulate and return to my role as the family ATM. Instead, they just escalated a civil debt collection matter into potential criminal territory. When I got home, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed message. Last chance. $8,470 for the mortgage, $20,000 for the wedding, and this all goes away. Otherwise, we'll make sure everyone in Hartford knows what kind of person you really are. I took a photo of the note and sent it to both Thomas and Officer Martinez. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting a very different kind of message. Theory tepatankowi pagos rise potin. If they wanted to play hardball, I had resources they couldn't imagine. If they wanted to destroy my reputation, I had documentation of 28 years of financial manipulation. If they wanted to threaten my business, I had legal representation and law enforcement backing. Most importantly, I had something they desperately needed and couldn't get anywhere else: control over the mortgage to their house. By the time I finished typing, I'd composed a formal letter that would be delivered by certified mail the next morning. It outlined exactly what I knew about their financial situation, exactly what evidence I had of their harassment campaign, and exactly what would happen if they continued their current course of action. The letter ended with a simple choice. They could work with me as a professional creditor, following standard debt collection procedures, or they could continue their harassment campaign and face the full legal consequences of their actions. But they couldn't do both, Paco. The next morning I sent copies of the letter to their attorney, the police department, and my own legal file. Then I went to my office and got back to the business of being a landlord and debt collection professional. If my family wanted to find out what happened when you threatened someone with real resources and professional legal backing, they were about to get a very expensive education. The amateur hour of family manipulation was over. They just entered the professional arena of business litigation, and they were catastrophically outgunned. The war room was Thomas Rowe's conference room, but it had become my second office over the past week. Maps of my properties covered one wall, legal documents were spread across the mahogany table, and a whiteboard tracked every instance of harassment with dates, times, and evidence. "They've made this incredibly easy for us," Thomas said, reviewing the latest batch of documentation I'd brought him. "Most harassment cases are he said, she said situations. Your family has been thoughtful enough to create a comprehensive paper trail." Sitting across from Thomas was Rebecca Martinez, the private investigator he'd recommended when it became clear we needed to document the full scope of my family's campaign. Rebecca was a former Hartford police detective who specialized in financial crimes and harassment cases. "I've traced the tenant harassment calls," Rebecca said, pulling out a folder thick with phone records and transcripts. "They're coming from a prepaid cell phone, but the purchase was made with a credit card registered to Delilah Hartwell. She's not exactly covering her tracks." "What about the anonymous notes and text messages?" I asked. "Same pattern. The text came from a different prepaid phone, but it was activated at the same Verizon store 20 minutes after Delilah's phone was purchased. Someone was very busy that day." Thomas leaned back in his chair, a satisfied expression on his face. "Victoria, in my 20 years of practice, I've rarely seen defendants hand us this much evidence. They're not just harassing you, they're documenting their own crimes." The irony wasn't lost on me. My family, who'd spent decades manipulating situations to their advantage, had stumbled into a legal battle they were spectacularly unprepared for. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We're going to give them one final opportunity to resolve this professionally," Thomas said. "I'm drafting what we call a demand letter. It'll outline their options clearly and establish a deadline for response. If they continue their harassment campaign after receiving formal legal notice, we move to civil court and pursue damages." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "I'll continue monitoring their activities. If they're smart, they'll back down. If they're not," she shrugged, "I'll have enough evidence to support criminal charges." But the most unexpected support came from a source I'd never anticipated. That afternoon, while I was reviewing rental applications at my office, my assistant Jennifer knocked on my door. "Victoria, there's someone here to see you. Says he's your Uncle Paul." Uncle Paul was Dad's youngest brother, someone I'd seen maybe a dozen times at family gatherings over the years. He was the family black sheep, a carpenter who'd never married, never had kids, and had always been treated as slightly disappointing by the rest of the family. "Paul?" I said, genuinely surprised as he entered my office. "This is unexpected." He was a tall, lean man in his 50s, with calloused hands and an easy smile that reminded me why I'd always liked him, even though we barely knew each other. "Victoria," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I heard about what's been happening. Thought you might want to know you're not fighting this alone." I studied his face, looking for signs of the family manipulation I'd become so familiar with. "I'm not sure what you mean." Paul pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be text messages. Your parents have been calling family members for a week, trying to get everyone to pressure you into backing down. They've been telling people you're mentally unstable, financially abusing them, and threatening to destroy the family over money. My stomach sank. I'd known they were escalating, but I hadn't realized they were conducting a full-scale family propaganda campaign. The thing is, Paul continued, they picked the wrong person to try that story on. I've been watching this family dynamic for 20 years, and I've seen how they treat you versus how they treat Delilah. What they're describing doesn't match what I've observed. He handed me his phone, showing me a text thread with my father. Dad's message read, Paul, we need your help. Victoria has lost her mind and is trying to steal our house. She's threatening to make us homeless unless we pay for Delilah's wedding. We think she might be having some kind of breakdown. Can you talk to her? Paul's response was brief. That doesn't sound like the Victoria I know. Maybe you should talk to a financial counselor about planning a wedding you can actually afford. Dad's reply was immediate and angry. I can't believe you're taking her side. Family should stick together. Paul's final message made me smile. Family should treat each other fairly. Victoria's been carrying this family financially for years. Maybe it's time you carried yourselves. You defended me, I said, looking up from his phone. Victoria, I've been to family dinners. I've watched them guilt you into paying for things while treating Delilah like visiting royalty. What's happening now isn't surprising. It's just the first time you've said no. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Validation from a family member who wasn't asking for anything in return. There's more, Paul said. Your Aunt Linda called me yesterday, trying to get me to sign some kind of family petition asking you to return to your senses. When I refused, she told me about the lawyer they hired and the plan to go after your business. What plan? Paul's expression darkened. They're not just trying to scare your tenants. Linda mentioned something about reporting you to licensing boards, claiming you're using your real estate business to hide income and avoid taxes. They want to get your business licenses reviewed. This was a new level of escalation I hadn't anticipated. Attacking my tenants was harassment. Attacking my professional licenses was an attempt to destroy my livelihood entirely. Paul, I need to ask, why are you telling me this? Why are you getting involved? He was quiet for a moment, staring out the window of my office. Because I know what it's like to be the family disappointment. I know what it's like to have your choices questioned and your boundaries ignored. The difference is, I never had anything they wanted, so they mostly left me alone. He turned back to me, his expression serious. You built something real, Victoria. You made smart choices, worked hard, and created financial independence. They can't stand that you don't need them anymore, so they're trying to tear down what you built to force you back into dependence. That evening, I called an emergency meeting with Thomas and Rebecca to discuss the new threats to my professional licenses. This is actually good news, Thomas said when I explained what Paul had told me. It shows premeditation and a coordinated campaign to cause financial harm. That strengthens our civil case considerably. Rebecca was already making notes. I'll reach out to my contacts at the relevant licensing boards. Most agencies keep records of complaints, even frivolous ones. If they file false reports, that's another criminal charge. What about Paul? I asked. He's putting himself at risk by helping me. He's a grown man making his own choices, Thomas replied. But we should document his information carefully. Having a family member willing to testify about their tactics could be valuable. Over the next few days, my support network expanded in ways I'd never expected. Janet from my property management company reached out to other landlords in the area, warning them about harassment tactics and creating an informal network of business owners watching out for each other. My tenant, Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who'd been most upset by the harassment calls, brought me homemade cookies and a card signed by all the residents of the duplex, expressing their support and thanking me for handling the situation professionally. Even my accountant, Margaret Sullivan, called to offer assistance. Victoria, I've been doing taxes for small business owners for 30 years. If anyone questions your financial practices, I have records going back to your first rental property purchase. You're one of the most scrupulous clients I've ever worked with. But the most significant support came from an unexpected source. Jonathan Blackstone, Delilah's fiancé. He appeared at my office on Thursday afternoon, looking haggard and uncomfortable. Unlike the confident, entitled young man I'd met at family gatherings, this version of Jonathan seemed genuinely distressed. "Victoria," he said, sitting across from my desk without the usual pleasantries, "I need to talk to you about what's been happening." "I'm listening." "I didn't know about the mortgage situation when all this started," he said. "Delilah told me your parents were having temporary cash flow issues, and that you were being unreasonable about helping with the wedding. And now?" Jonathan rubbed his face with both hands. "Now I know they're 3 months behind on their mortgage, they've maxed out their credit cards planning this wedding, and they expect us to start our marriage with my family funding a party they can't afford." I waited, sensing there was more. "My parents are asking questions, Victoria. They want to know why Delilah's family can't contribute their agreed-upon amount. They're wondering if they should be concerned about the financial stability of the family their son is marrying into." This was a development I hadn't anticipated. Jonathan's family wealth had been part of the appeal for my parents. The assumption that marrying into money would solve all of Delilah's financial problems. But wealthy families didn't stay wealthy by ignoring red flags about financial responsibility. "What are you asking me, Jonathan?" "I'm asking if there's a way to resolve this that doesn't involve destroying both our families," he said quietly. "Because right now, it looks like this wedding is going to cost everyone everything they care about." For the first time since this all began, I was talking to someone who understood that the real issue wasn't the money. It was the pattern of financial dysfunction that had been building for years. And for the first time, I had leverage not just over my parents, but over the entire situation that had started this mess. The moment I decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense came on a Friday morning when I found my car vandalized in my apartment complex parking lot. Someone had keyed deep scratches along both sides and left a note under the windshield wiper. "Pay up or it gets worse." That was the final straw. I photographed everything, called the police, and then made a phone call that would change the entire trajectory of this conflict. "Rebecca," I said when the private investigator answered, "it's time to stop documenting their crimes and start taking action. I want you to compile everything we have into a comprehensive report, and I want it delivered to every person and institution that matters to them." "Define every person and institution," Rebecca replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Their attorney, obviously, the police, but also their mortgage broker, their insurance company, Delilah's wedding venue, Jonathan's parents, and every family member who's been getting their version of events. That's going nuclear, Victoria. Are you sure you're ready for that level of escalation?" I looked at my scratched car and thought about months of harassment, threats, and attempts to destroy my business. "I'm not escalating anything. I'm finishing something they started." The first phase of my counterattack was surgical precision documentation. Rebecca and I spent the weekend creating what she called the definitive record, a chronological timeline of every harassment incident, every threat, every attempt to damage my business or reputation. The document was 47 pages long and included phone records, photographs, witness statements, and copies of every threatening message. But documentation was just the foundation. The real power move was strategic information distribution. Monday morning, I started making phone calls. Hesse Prasets. The first call was to Bradley Thornton, the attorney my family had hired. "Mr. Thornton, this is Victoria Hartwell. I believe you represent my parents in a matter concerning mortgage collection." "Miss Hartwell," his voice was cautious, "I've been expecting to hear from your attorney. I'm calling personally to inform you that your clients have been conducting a criminal harassment campaign against my business and personal property. I'm sending you documentation of their activities, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to withdraw from representation before this becomes a criminal matter, rather than a civil one." There was a long pause. "Miss Hartwell, those are serious allegations." "Yes, they are. You'll have the evidence within the hour. After you review it, I think you'll find that your clients have been less than honest about the nature of this dispute." The second call was to Jonathan's parents. I'd never spoken to them directly, but Rebecca had easily found their contact information through public records. Mrs. Blackstone? This is Victoria Hartwell, Delilah's sister. I believe we need to have a conversation about some recent developments that may affect your son's upcoming wedding. The conversation with Eleanor Blackstone was eye-opening. She was clearly a woman accustomed to dealing with complex family and financial situations, and she listened without interruption as I explained the timeline of events. "Victoria," she said when I finished, "I appreciate you reaching out directly. Jonathan mentioned there were some family tensions, but he didn't provide this level of detail. Mrs. Blackstone, I want to be clear that my dispute with my parents has nothing to do with Jonathan or my feelings about their engagement. This is purely a matter of business and personal boundaries." "I understand. And I want you to know that Harold and I have been concerned about some of the financial arrangements for this wedding. When the bride's family requests additional funding after commitments have been made, it raises questions about financial planning and responsibility." That was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. The Blackstones weren't just wealthy, they were smart about money. They understood that financial dysfunction was a red flag for family stability. "Ty, I'm sending you the same documentation I'm providing to everyone involved," I told her. "I think it will help you understand the full context of the situation." The third call was to the Millbrook Country Club, where Delilah's wedding was scheduled to take place. "Mr. Davidson? This is Victoria Hartwell. I understand my sister Delilah Hartwell has a wedding booked at your facility for next month." "Yes, Miss Hartwell. Beautiful event planned. Are you calling about additional arrangements?" "Actually, I'm calling to inform you that there may be issues with payment for the event. The family is currently involved in financial litigation, and I wanted to make sure your establishment is protected." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Financial litigation? I'm sending you documentation about the ongoing legal issues. You may want to require full payment in advance rather than accepting payment on the day of the event." By Wednesday, the effect of my strategic information campaign was becoming apparent. Thomas called me with an update that made me smile for the first time in weeks. "Bradley Thornton withdrew from representing your parents this morning," he said. "Apparently, after reviewing the evidence you sent him, he decided the case wasn't worth the potential malpractice exposure." "What does that mean for them?" "It means they need to find a new attorney willing to take on a case involving documented harassment and potential criminal activity. That's going to be expensive and difficult." The second domino fell that afternoon when Jonathan called me. "Victoria, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "My parents want to meet with your parents to discuss the wedding situation." "What kind of discussion?" "The kind where they ask pointed questions about financial responsibility and family stability. My mother specifically mentioned your documentation of harassment activities." I could hear the stress in his voice, and for the first time I felt genuinely sorry for him. He was caught in the middle of a situation he'd never asked for. "Jonathan, I want you to know that I never intended for this to affect your relationship with Delilah. This is about my parents' behavior, not about your wedding." "I know," he said quietly. "But Victoria, my family is asking whether we should postpone the wedding until these legal issues are resolved. They're concerned about being associated with ongoing harassment allegations." The third domino was the most satisfying. Rebecca called Thursday morning with news that made my entire week. "The Millbrook Country Club called your parents yesterday," she reported. "They're requiring full payment 14 days before the event instead of accepting payment on the wedding day. Apparently, they don't want to risk being involved in a financial dispute." What was my parents' response? "According to my source at the club, your father became very angry and demanded to know who had told them about private family matters. When they explained that they'd received documentation about ongoing litigation, he threatened to sue them for breach of contract." "Did they back down?" Rebecca laughed. "The club's attorney pointed out that their contract specifically allows them to require advance payment if they become aware of potential collection issues. Your parents can either pay in full by next Friday or lose their deposit and venue." But the most significant development came Friday afternoon, when I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My mother appeared at my door without warning, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past 2 weeks. Gone was the perfectly coiffed woman who'd ambushed me at my office earlier in the month. This version of Mom looked exhausted, defeated, and genuinely frightened. "Victoria," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." "Do we?" I asked, not inviting her to sit down. "Last I heard, I was no longer part of the family." "Please," she said. And for the first time in my adult life, I heard genuine desperation in her voice. "Please just listen to me for 5 minutes." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, and she sat down heavily. "Your father and I have made some mistakes," she began, the words coming out like she was pulling teeth. "We may have overreacted to your position on the wedding." "Overreacted," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling criminal harassment now?" Her face crumpled. "We never meant for it to go this far. We just wanted you to understand how important this wedding is to Delilah, how important family should be." By vandalizing my car? By calling my tenants with false information? By trying to get my business licenses revoked? "We were desperate," she said, tears starting to flow. "The club wants full payment next Friday. Jonathan's parents are asking questions we can't answer. Delilah is having panic attacks because she thinks her wedding is going to be canceled." I watched her cry, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but a kind of sad resignation. This was what winning looked like. Not triumph, but the complete collapse of people who'd built their lives on manipulation and entitlement. "Mom," I said quietly, "what exactly do you want from me?" She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "We want to find a way to fix this, to go back to being a family." "You can't go back," I said. "You forged my signature on legal documents. You harassed my business associates. You vandalized my property. You tried to destroy my livelihood because I wouldn't fund a party I couldn't afford." "But we can work something out," she said, leaning forward. "Some kind of payment plan for the mortgage, maybe a smaller contribution to the wedding." "No," I said, cutting her off. "There is no payment plan for criminal harassment. There is no smaller contribution to financial irresponsibility. There is only what happens next." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder I'd prepared for exactly this moment. "This contains copies of every piece of evidence we've collected about your harassment campaign. Tonight, I'm filing formal charges with the Hartford Police Department. Monday morning, I'm filing a civil lawsuit for damages to my business and property. Tuesday, I'm sending copies of everything to the state ethics board that oversees real estate licensing, not to file a complaint, but to demonstrate that the complaints you've threatened to file are retaliatory and frivolous." Mom's face went white. "Victoria, you can't." "I can and I am," I said firmly. "You wanted to know what kind of power real money could buy. You wanted to test what happened when you threatened someone with resources and connections. Consider this your education." I stood up, ending the meeting. "You have until Monday morning to catch up your mortgage payments. After that, foreclosure proceedings continue as scheduled, and you'll be dealing with my attorney exclusively." As she left my office, shoulders shaking with sobs, I felt something I'd never experienced in relation to my family. Complete and total finality. The strategic counterattack was complete. Now it was time to see if they were smart enough to surrender before this got even worse for them. The meeting that would determine everything was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in the conference room of Thomas Rowe's law office. What was supposed to be a simple debt negotiation had evolved into something that looked more like a corporate merger or a surrender ceremony. On one side of the polished mahogany table sat my legal team, Thomas, Rebecca Martinez, and myself. Our side of the table was organized, professional, with neat stacks of documentation and laptops open to spreadsheets that detailed every aspect of the financial situation. On the other side sat what remained of my family's defense: my parents, Delilah, Jonathan, and their new attorney, a harried-looking man named Dennis Fletcher, who'd taken the case on Tuesday after 3 other firms had declined representation. The atmosphere in the room was electric with tension. Dad wore his best suit but looked like he hadn't slept in days. Mom's hands trembled as she clutched a tissue that was already shredded from nervous fidgeting. Delilah sat between them, her face blotchy from crying, wearing the kind of expensive outfit that had become her signature but now seemed almost defiant given the circumstances. Jonathan sat slightly apart from the family, his body language suggesting he was already distancing himself from whatever was about to unfold. Attorney Fletcher cleared his throat to begin. "Thank you all for coming. I think we can resolve this matter amicably if everyone is willing to." "Let's be clear about what we're here to discuss," Thomas interrupted smoothly. "This isn't a negotiation. This is my client offering your clients one final opportunity to resolve multiple criminal and civil matters before they escalate further. Fletcher's confident opening deflated immediately. Criminal matters? Thomas slid a folder across the table. Harassment, property destruction, interference with business relationships, and filing false reports with regulatory agencies. The Hartford Police Department has an active investigation, and we have comprehensive documentation of a months-long campaign of intimidation. I watched my parents' faces as Fletcher opened the folder. Dad's jaw clenched as he saw photographs of my vandalized car. Mom actually gasped when she saw printed screenshots of the threatening text messages. These allegations are, Fletcher began. Documented fact, Rebecca interjected, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years in law enforcement. Phone records, witness statements, physical evidence, and financial records. Your clients have created a prosecutor's dream case. Delilah finally spoke, her voice shrill with panic. This is insane. We're talking about a family disagreement over a wedding, and you're acting like we're criminals. You became criminals when you vandalized my property and harassed my business associates, I said calmly. When you filed false reports trying to get my licenses revoked. When you sent threatening messages and anonymous notes. This stopped being about a wedding weeks ago. But we're family, she cried, the same refrain that had worked for so many years. Family doesn't commit crimes against each other, I replied. Family doesn't try to destroy each other's livelihoods when they don't get their way. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Victoria, before we go any further, I need to ask, is there any resolution that doesn't involve criminal charges? My family is asking serious questions about proceeding with the wedding while these legal issues are ongoing. The room went dead silent. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the point where their choices had real consequences that extended beyond just our family dynamic. That depends, I said, on whether your parents are prepared to accept responsibility for their actions and agree to reasonable terms going forward. Dad's face was purple with suppressed rage. Reasonable terms? You're the one who bought our mortgage and then used it to blackmail us. I bought a portfolio of distressed debt as a business investment, I corrected. You defaulted on your mortgage payments. Those are facts, not opinions. Thomas opened his laptop and projected a spreadsheet onto the wall screen. Let's review the current financial situation objectively. The numbers were stark and undeniable. Mortgage arrears, $8,470. Credit card debt, $47,000. Home equity line of credit, $89,000 at limit. Wedding expenses committed, $75,000. Wedding expenses paid, $23,000. Amount still owed to vendors, $52,000. Your total debt-to-income ratio is 340%, Thomas continued. In simple terms, you owe more than 3 times your annual income. This wedding would increase that to 380%. No financial institution would consider this sustainable. Fletcher studied the numbers, his expression growing more concerned. These figures, are they accurate? Completely accurate, Rebecca confirmed. We've verified every account through public records and vendor confirmations. Mom spoke for the first time since entering the room. We had a plan. Victoria was going to help with the wedding costs, and we were going to use that money to catch up on the mortgage. So you were planning to use money intended for a wedding to pay off debt? Thomas asked. It would have worked out, Dad said defensively. It would have been fraud, Thomas replied. Taking money under false pretenses is a criminal offense. Fletcher was furiously taking notes, clearly realizing his clients had failed to mention several crucial details about their financial planning. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice tight with stress. I need to understand something. If they can't pay for their portion of the wedding, and they're facing foreclosure, what exactly are we supposed to tell the vendors? The club? My parents? Delilah turned to him with desperation in her eyes. We'll figure it out. Victoria will do nothing, I said firmly. I've made my position clear. I'm not funding this wedding, and I'm not forgiving debt that's already in default. Then what are you proposing? Fletcher asked. Thomas clicked to the next slide of his presentation. Here are my client's terms for resolving this matter. The terms appeared on the screen. Immediate payment of $8,470 in mortgage arrears. Establishment of automatic payment plan for future mortgage payments. Written apology and public retraction of all false statements. Agreement to cease all harassment and contact with Victoria's business associates. Restitution of $3,200 for property damage and business losses. Voluntary surrender of all social media accounts used for harassment. In exchange, Thomas continued, my client will not pursue criminal charges for harassment and property destruction, and will not file civil suits for business interference and defamation. The silence that followed was deafening. And if we refuse? Dad asked, his voice barely controlled. Then we proceed with all available legal remedies, Thomas replied. Criminal charges, civil litigation, and foreclosure proceedings. We estimate your total legal costs would exceed $50,000, assuming you could find attorneys willing to represent you after reviewing the evidence. Fletcher was reading through the terms, making calculations on his legal pad. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, I need to advise you that these terms are remarkably generous given the strength of the evidence against you. Generous? Delilah screeched. She's destroying my wedding. Your wedding was already financially impossible, Jonathan said quietly, speaking for the first time with real authority. Victoria didn't create this situation. We did by planning something we couldn't afford. The room erupted. How can you take her side? Delilah demanded. I'm not taking sides, Jonathan replied, his voice getting stronger. I'm facing reality. My parents have already asked whether we should postpone the wedding until these legal issues are resolved. The club is demanding full payment next week. Our photographer is asking for guarantees because someone told them we might not be able to pay. He turned to look directly at me. Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. If they accept these terms and get current on their mortgage, will you work with them going forward as a normal creditor? Yes, I said without hesitation. I have no interest in owning their house or managing family drama. I want them to make their payments on time and leave me alone. That's all I've ever wanted. Jonathan nodded and turned back to Delilah. Then we have a choice. We can accept these terms, scale back our wedding to something we can actually afford, and move forward with our lives. Or we can fight this and lose everything. The house, our savings, our reputations, and probably our relationship. Delilah stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You're supposed to support me. You're supposed to be on my side. I am supporting you, he said gently. I'm trying to save us from making a mistake that will haunt us for years. Dad slammed his hand on the table. This is extortion. You're using our financial situation to force us into compliance. No, I said, standing up from my chair. This is consequences. For the first time in your lives, you're facing actual consequences for your choices and actions. You can't guilt your way out of this. You can't manipulate your way around it. You can't make it my problem to solve. I looked around the table at each of them. I spent 28 years being your financial safety net. I gave up my car money, my savings, my peace of mind, my boundaries. I enabled your irresponsible spending and Delilah's entitlement because I thought that's what family meant. My voice grew stronger. But family doesn't mean funding other people's dreams at the expense of your own stability. Family doesn't mean accepting abuse because you share DNA. And family definitely doesn't mean destroying someone's business because they won't bankroll your party. I sat back down, my heart pounding but my voice steady. You have 24 hours to decide. Accept these terms and move forward responsibly, or reject them and face the full legal consequences of everything you've done. Thomas closed his laptop. I think that concludes our presentation. Mr. Fletcher, we'll need your client's decision by 5 p.m. tomorrow, or we proceed with filing all pending charges and civil actions. As we left the conference room, I caught a glimpse of my family huddled together, Fletcher speaking urgently in low tones while Delilah sobbed and my parents stared at the table in defeat. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching peace. The confrontation was over. The truth was on the table, the choice was entirely theirs. 24 hours would determine whether they were finally ready to accept responsibility for their actions, or whether they would choose to fight a battle they couldn't possibly win. The call came at 4:47 p.m. on Friday, 13 minutes before the deadline. I was in my office reviewing lease agreements for a new property acquisition when my phone rang with Dennis Fletcher's number. "Miss Hartwell." Fletcher's voice was tired, defeated. "My clients accept your terms." I felt a rush of something, not exactly triumph, but relief mixed with vindication. After months of harassment, threats, and manipulation, it was finally over. "All terms?" I asked, wanting absolute clarity. "All terms. They'll have a cashier's check for the mortgage arrears by Monday morning, along with signed agreements for automatic payment plans. The written apology and retraction statements are being drafted now. They understand that any future contact with your business associates or resumption of harassment will result in immediate criminal prosecution. And the restitution for property damage? Included in Monday's payment. Miss Hartwell, I want you to know that my clients deeply regret the escalation of this situation. They understand they made serious errors in judgment." I almost laughed. Errors in judgment was quite a euphemism for months of criminal harassment, but I wasn't interested in semantic battles anymore. "Mr. Fletcher, please make sure your clients understand that this agreement is contingent on full compliance. Any violation of any term will result in immediate prosecution of all previously documented crimes." They understand completely. After I hung up, I sat in my office chair for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't checking my phone for threatening messages or looking over my shoulder for family members ready to ambush me with guilt trips. It was over. That evening, I called Thomas to confirm the details and next steps. "Congratulations," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. In 20 years of practice, I've rarely seen such a complete victory in a family dispute. You got everything you asked for and avoided years of litigation. What happens now? Now we monitor compliance and document everything. If they stick to the agreement, this chapter closes permanently. If they violate any terms, we have ironclad evidence for criminal prosecution. And the foreclosure proceedings? Suspended pending their payment on Monday. Assuming they fulfill their obligations, the mortgage returns to normal servicing with automatic payments. You become a traditional creditor with a performing loan. Sunday evening brought an unexpected email from Jonathan. The subject line read, "Thank you, Victoria," it began. "I wanted to reach out personally before everything becomes official tomorrow. I know this situation has been incredibly difficult for everyone involved, but I need you to know that I think you did the right thing. Delilah and I have spent the weekend completely replanning our wedding. We're moving the venue to my family's country club, scaling back the guest list, and focusing on what actually matters. Starting our marriage on solid financial ground rather than with overwhelming debt. My parents have offered to cover the modified wedding costs as their gift to us, with the understanding that Delilah and I will be responsible for our own financial decisions going forward. I know you probably don't want to hear from any of us right now, but I wanted you to know that your boundary setting forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about financial responsibility and family dynamics. That's a gift, even if it doesn't feel like one right now. No, you gal. I hope someday we can rebuild a healthier relationship. You deserve better than what this family has given you. Respectfully, Jonathan." I read the email twice, surprised by the maturity and insight it demonstrated. Jonathan had been caught in the middle of a situation he hadn't created, and he'd chosen to align himself with reality rather than dysfunction. That took courage. Monday morning arrived with a remarkable sense of normalcy. For the first time in months, I woke up without immediately checking my phone for threatening messages or my car for new damage. At 9:30 a.m., Fletcher's assistant delivered an envelope to my office containing everything we'd requested. A cashier's check for $11,670 covering mortgage arrears and restitution, signed agreements for automatic payment processing, and 2 letters that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. The first letter was from my parents. To whom it may concern. We, Robert and Evelyn Hartwell, wish to publicly retract any statements we may have made regarding our daughter Victoria Hartwell's business practices or personal character. We acknowledge that our previous statements were made in anger and do not reflect the truth about Victoria's professional conduct or integrity. Victoria has operated her real estate business with complete honesty and transparency. Any suggestions to the contrary were unfounded and inappropriate. We apologize for any inconvenience or concern our statements may have caused to Victoria's business associates, tenants, or professional colleagues. Sincerely, Robert and Evelyn Hartwell. The second letter was more personal. Victoria, we owe you an apology that goes far beyond the legal requirements of our settlement. We allowed our frustration and financial stress to lead us into behavior that was inexcusable. Harassing your tenants, vandalizing your property, and attempting to damage your professional reputation were wrong, regardless of our motivations. For too many years, we treated you as our financial backup plan, rather than as our daughter. We expected you to sacrifice your goals for ours without recognizing that you had your own dreams and responsibilities. Have us. You deserved better from us. You deserved parents who celebrated your success, rather than demanding you share it. You deserved a family that respected your boundaries rather than punishing you for setting them. We don't expect forgiveness, and we don't expect our relationship to return to what it was. We do hope that someday you might be willing to rebuild something healthier with us. We are proud of what you've accomplished, even if we never told you that when it mattered most. Love, Mom and Dad. I read both letters several times, looking for the manipulation or hidden agenda I'd been trained to expect. But they seemed genuine, perhaps the first completely honest communication I'd ever received from my parents. That afternoon, Rebecca called with an update on the parallel investigation. Quote, "The harassment case is officially closed," she reported. "Hartford PD is satisfied with the restitution and written admissions of wrongdoing. No criminal charges will be filed as long as the agreement terms are maintained. And the business impact assessment, minimal long-term damage. 3 tenants requested early lease terminations, but we found replacement renters within a week. Your professional reputation is intact, and several colleagues have privately expressed admiration for how you handled the situation. Any sign of continued harassment or surveillance? Nothing. They appear to be in full compliance with the no-contact provisions. Your parents have even removed all social media posts related to the conflict. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I relaxed. I poured a glass of wine, ordered takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, and watched a movie without checking my phone every 10 minutes, or listening for unusual sounds outside my apartment. For the first time since this all began, I felt truly safe. Wednesday brought news that surprised me more than anything else in this entire saga. Uncle Paul called with an update from the family grapevine. "Victoria, I thought you'd want to know. Delilah and Jonathan had their wedding last weekend. Already?" I was genuinely surprised. I thought it was supposed to be next month. They moved it up and scaled it way back. Immediate family only. Held at Jonathan's family estate. Simple ceremony followed by dinner. From what I heard, it was actually quite beautiful. How is everyone handling the change? Paul was quiet for a moment. Better than I expected, honestly. Your parents seem different. More subdued, but also more realistic. Your mother actually told Linda that she's proud of how you handled the situation, even though it was difficult for everyone. She said that? She did. I think losing their lawyer and facing criminal charges was a wake-up call about how far things had gone. They're in financial counseling now, trying to get their debt under control. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and spreadsheets, doing something I hadn't been able to do in months, planning for my future rather than managing crisis after crisis. My real estate portfolio was stronger than ever. The rental income was steady and growing. The mortgage payments from my parents were now automated and current. My business reputation had survived intact, and I'd gained valuable experience in crisis management and legal strategy. More importantly, I'd gained something I'd never had before: complete financial and emotional independence from family manipulation. The victory wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about finally becoming the person I'd always been capable of being, when I wasn't constantly managing other people's crises and funding other people's dreams. For the first time in my adult life, my money was my own, my boundaries were respected, and my future was entirely under my control. The family that had spent decades treating me like their personal ATM had learned that some accounts eventually close when they're consistently overdrawn. And I had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is refusing to enable their dysfunction, even when they hate you for it. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office, a corner suite in a downtown Hartford high-rise that overlooked the Connecticut River, when my assistant Jennifer knocked on my door with an expression I'd learned to recognize. "Victoria, there's a woman here who says she needs help with a family financial situation. She doesn't have an appointment, but she seems really desperate." I looked up from the investment analysis I'd been reviewing. Since settling the situation with my family, my real estate business had exploded. Word had somehow gotten out about my successful debt acquisition strategies, and I'd become the go-to person for complex financial situations involving family dynamics. "What's her name?" "Sarah Martinez. She says someone told her you help people who are being financially manipulated by their families." I saved my work and closed my laptop. "Send her in." Sarah Martinez was probably in her early 30s, with dark circles under her eyes and the kind of nervous energy I recognized immediately. She clutched a manila folder like it contained her life savings, and her hands shook slightly as she sat down across from my desk. "Miss Hartwell," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if you can help me, but I'm out of options. My family is trying to force me to co-sign for my brother's business loan, and when I refused, they started a campaign to destroy my credit and my job." The story that unfolded over the next hour was depressingly familiar. Sarah was a nurse who'd worked her way through school and built a modest but stable financial life. Her younger brother Miguel had a history of failed business ventures and poor financial decisions, but the family consistently pressured Sarah to bail him out because she was, quote, successful and could afford it. "They've been calling my supervisor at the hospital," she said, tears starting to flow, telling them I'm having mental health issues and might be unreliable. "They've been calling my mortgage company claiming I'm in financial distress and can't make my payments. Yesterday, I found out someone opened a credit card in my name." I leaned forward, my attention fully focused. "Do you have documentation of these activities?" She opened her manila folder and spread out printed emails, phone records, and credit reports, with the same desperate efficiency I remembered from my own crisis 6 months earlier. "Sarah," I said after reviewing her materials, "what you're describing isn't just family pressure. This is identity theft, harassment, and fraud. These are serious crimes." "But they're my family," she said, echoing the same words I'd used for decades. "Everyone says I should just help Miguel, and this will all go away." Has helping Miguel in the past made anything go away, or has it just made the demands bigger? She was quiet for a long moment. "Bigger," she admitted. "Every time I've helped, the next crisis has been more expensive." I spent the next 2 hours walking Sarah through the same process I'd learned the hard way. We documented everything, identified her legal options, and created a strategy for protecting both her credit and her career. But more importantly, I helped her understand something that had taken me 28 years to learn. Setting boundaries with family isn't selfish, I told her as our meeting ended. It's necessary. And protecting yourself from financial abuse isn't betraying your family. It's protecting your ability to genuinely help when there's a real crisis. 3 weeks later, Sarah called to tell me that her family had backed down after receiving a letter from her attorney. Miguel would have to find legitimate funding for his business, or accept that it wasn't viable. More importantly, Sarah had learned to say no without guilt. She was the 15th person I'd helped with similar situations in the past 6 months. The word had spread through an informal network of people who'd experienced family financial manipulation. A support group that met monthly in the basement of a downtown church had started referring people to me. Therapists who specialized in family dynamics had begun mentioning my name to clients dealing with financial abuse. I hadn't set out to become an expert in family financial dysfunction, but apparently, my experience had given me skills that were desperately needed. One evening in late spring, I was working late in my office when I received an unexpected email. The sender was listed as D. Blackstone, Delilah's married name. I hesitated before opening it, wondering if this was a return to old patterns or something genuinely different. "Victoria," the email began, "I hope it's okay that I'm writing to you. I know we haven't spoken since everything happened, and I understand if you don't want to hear from me. I wanted you to know that Jonathan and I have been in counseling, both couples counseling and financial counseling. We're learning about healthy boundaries and responsible financial planning. We're also learning about family dynamics and how our upbringing affected our understanding of money and relationships. I realized something that I should have understood years ago. You weren't my family's ATM. You were my sister. And instead of celebrating your success and independence, we punished you for it. Instead of respecting your boundaries, we attacked you for having them. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not asking to rebuild our relationship. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand why you did what you did. You were protecting yourself and trying to teach us something we needed to learn. Jonathan and I are doing well. We're living within our means, building our own emergency fund and planning for our future responsibly. Our marriage is stronger because we learned to be financially independent instead of depending on other people to fund our lifestyle. I heard through Uncle Paul that you're helping other people in similar situations. I think that's wonderful. I wish someone had helped me understand these things before I hurt the people I love. Thank you for teaching me what healthy boundaries look like, even though I hated you for it at the time. Your sister, Delilah. I read the email 3 times, surprised by the depth of insight and genuine accountability it demonstrated. This was the first communication I'd received from Delilah that wasn't focused on what she needed from me. I drafted a brief response. Delilah, thank you for writing. I'm glad you and Jonathan are building something healthy together. That takes courage and commitment. I'm proud of you for doing the hard work of changing patterns that have been in place for years. Maybe someday we can have coffee and start fresh. Victoria. That weekend, I drove out to Millbrook Heights for the first time since the legal settlement. I didn't go to see my parents. That relationship was still healing and might never return to what most people would consider normal. Instead, I went to look at the house where I'd grown up and to reflect on how much had changed. The house looked exactly the same: white shutters, manicured lawn, picture-perfect exterior that had always hidden so much dysfunction underneath. But now I saw it differently. It wasn't the prison of family obligation I'd escaped from. It was just a house where people lived and made mistakes and hopefully learned from them. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Paul. Saw you drive by, coffee at Murphy's Diner if you want to catch up. An hour later, I was sitting across from Paul in a booth at the same diner where I'd eaten countless family breakfasts as a child. How are they doing? I asked, genuinely curious about my parents' progress. Better than I expected, Paul said, stirring sugar into his coffee. They're still in financial counseling, and they've paid off 2 of their credit cards. Your mom got a part-time job at the library. First time she's worked outside the house in 20 years. And Dad? He's learning to live within a budget for the first time in his adult life. It's been humbling for him, but I think it's been good. He told me last week that he finally understands why you refuse to enable their spending. We talked for another hour about family, business, and the strange way life sometimes forces people to grow in directions they never expected. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the 15 people I'd helped escape family financial manipulation. I thought about Sarah Martinez, who was now thriving in her career without the constant stress of family financial crises. I thought about Delilah's email and the maturity it represented. Most of all, I thought about the woman I'd become through this process. Not just financially independent, but emotionally strong enough to maintain boundaries without guilt. Successful enough to help others without depleting myself. Confident enough to know that love doesn't require financial sacrifice. And family doesn't mean enabling dysfunction. The business I'd built was thriving beyond anything I'd imagined. 6 months earlier, I owned 23 rental properties, had a portfolio of performing loans, and had recently been approached by a private equity firm about expanding my debt acquisition strategies. But the real success wasn't measured in dollars or properties. It was measured in the peace I felt when I woke up each morning, knowing that my financial future was secure and my boundaries were respected. It was measured in the gratitude I felt from people like Sarah Martinez, who'd learned to protect themselves before the damage became irreversible. It was measured in the knowledge that I'd broken a cycle of financial manipulation that had probably existed in my family for generations. That night, I updated my business website with a new section, Family Financial Boundary Consulting. It was time to formalize what had become an unexpected calling. The phone started ringing the next morning. What had begun as my own desperate fight for financial independence had evolved into something larger. A practice dedicated to helping people understand that family love and financial responsibility weren't mutually exclusive, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is teaching them to stand on their own. I'd learned that money, properly managed, isn't just about security or success. It's about freedom. The freedom to choose relationships based on love rather than obligation, the freedom to help others without depleting yourself, and the freedom to build a life that reflects your values rather than other people's expectations. The family that had once treated me like their personal bank had inadvertently taught me the most valuable lesson of all: the difference between being needed and being respected, between being used and being loved. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do for the people you care about is refuse to enable their weakness, even when they hate you for it. Especially when they hate you for it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.